I'm going to do an example using all three methods to find and classify stationary points of the equation y equals x cubed minus 12x plus 2. First, we need to know where the stationary points are, and those are where the gradient equals 0, or where dy dx equals 0. So I'm going to find the derivative. So dy dx, well, the derivative of x cubed is 3x squared. The derivative of negative 12x is minus 12, and the derivative of 2 is 0, so that goes away. We now need to know when this is equal to 0, so we're going to set it equal to 0. And solve. You could add 12 and divide or whatever. I'm going to do it by factoring just to remind you, which means I'm going to factor 3 out. Now I can factor the difference of squares here, and I get 3 times x plus 2 times x minus 2. Now I could set the equations equal to 0, or the little factors equal to 0. And I find that there's a stationary point at x equals negative 2 and at x equals 2. Therefore, dy dx equals 0 when x equals 2. And we need to know the y that goes with that. Excuse me, when x equals negative 2 and 2. To find the y's, we then plug them in to the original equation, because we want to know the x, y coordinate for the original equation. So if you did negative 2, you'd get negative 2 cubed minus 12 times negative 2 plus 2, and that would give you 18. If you plugged in a 2, I will just tell you that'll give you negative 14. So now we know where the stationary points are. So now we'll do method 1. Method 1 is just to look at our picture. If we graphed it on the calculator, it would look like this, which means, it must be right there, this is a max, and this is a min. Done. Okay, method 2, we want to know using the slope by each point. So just looking at this graph, I can see the slope right here is positive, and the slope right here is negative, which would make x at negative 2 a max. And here's how I test it. I make a sign chart. Okay? I could pick any point to the left of negative 2, say negative 1, and if I plug that in to my dy dx, that'd be 3 times negative 1 squared minus 12. Okay, so that'd be 3 minus 12, or negative 9. I'd find the slope at negative 1, and I actually did it on this side, excuse me. So here's negative 1. I found the slope right here is negative 9. So that's a negative slope. If I plugged in negative 3, maybe over here, let's see, that would be 9 times 3 minus 12. We would get a slope of 15, which we can see would be positive. So what we realized is that anything to the left of negative 2 would be positive. In our example, we got 15. We know at negative 2 it would be 0. And to the right, when we plugged it in, we would get negative 9. It'd be negative, which makes this a max. We could do the same thing on the other side, and we could get a min. Okay, so that's that. Now, method 3. All right, so for method 3, we're going to take the second derivative. So if the first derivative was dy dx equals 3x squared minus 12, then the second derivative is going to be 6. I'm sorry that this keeps happening. I don't know why. 6x. All right. So now we know want to know what it is when x equals -2, our first stationary point. So when x is -2, we're going to plug it in. 6 times -2 is -12, which is less than 0. We go back up here to our little rules. If it is less than 0, then I know that point is a maximum. Okay. Now we want to know where it is at 2. 6 times 2 equals +12, which is greater than 0. So we know that point is a minimum. Okay. And that's the end of that. What I need you to do for homework is 21F, 1B, C, and D showing work. Number 2, B and C. Number 3, and number 4. And I'm going to give you some hints for 3 and 4. Okay, for 3, it is pretty straightforward. For 3I, you're just going to plug in t equals 5. For double I, plug in t equals 10. For part B, I, you need to find the derivative and then plug some stuff in, and for part B double I, find the derivative again and plug some stuff in. That may or may not help you. For 4, it will help you. For 4A, plug in set the equation equal to 0 to solve. So set the S of t equation equal to 0 and solve for t. You may have to factor or use the quadratic formula. For B, use your calculator and sketch a graph. All right? And leave it at that. If you can answer the question from the graph, great, but if not, just sketch the graph. For C, I, plug in t equals 4. For double I, okay, find the velocity equation or take the derivative and then plug in t equals 4. For triple I, take the derivative again to find the acceleration equation and plug in t equals 4. That much needs to be done before you come to class, and then we will discuss that.